Well, hello and welcome to the Unlocking Workplace Wellbeing podcast for HR managers and business owners, where we talk about workplace wellbeing, which makes everyone's lives better, including yours and mine. I'm Steven Pink. I'm CEO of Verve Healthcare, and my guest in this episode is Shelley Crawford. Shelley's a coaching psychologist, an international master coach, a resilience expert, and a wellbeing specialist. That's some CV. I think I might have probably needed all of those things at some point, but how do you know which intervention is best for you? Let's have a chat with Shelley and find out.
Hi, Steven. It's really lovely to be with you today. So how do you choose what professional you need and what's best for you? I suppose this really depends on your need at the time and what you feel more comfortable doing. So some people find that at different points of their life, they may have preferred working with a coach, especially if they've worked with a coach before. Another time, a therapist, and another time, perhaps a mentor. So all three professions will help their client to achieve change. And I think that's at the core of it. A person wanting to change their nutritional and exercise regime, for instance, might work with a health coach. A manager wanting to advance their career might work with a career coach or enlist the support of a mentor. And someone needing to understand a past trauma might then work with a trauma therapist.
So there's a lot of different things in there. What's the difference between, I don't know, say a coach and a counsellor, for example?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Stephen, and I get asked that question a lot. I think these days, and certainly from my perspective, there are many different answers. And that again depends on the speciality that the coach and the counselor focuses on. But in general, counseling or psychotherapy will focus on helping the client to understand, resolve and heal emotional trauma very often, and pain that might still be carried through from the past. And then coaching is largely focused on the present and the future. But now, having said that, a coach might still require you to do some reflecting on the past in order to help you understand how that impacts your learning and your behavior today and going forward. So while many coaches help you to identify goals, they help you to leverage personal strengths, take action, there are also many counselors or psychotherapists who have studied, and this is a growing field, have studied coaching, and they take a coaching approach in their therapeutic sessions.
Wow. So there's another piece of terminology I'd like to clarify. What's a coaching psychologist? What does one of those do?
Yeah, also a fairly new term in respect of the history of psychology and psychotherapy. But coaching psychology has recently come about because a lot of psychologists and also coaches wanted to have that other part to their service that they provide. So coaching psychology in its theoretical sense is an applied practice, and it's adopted across all domains of applied psychology. So again, you might see specialist areas like health and wellness, executive, business, career, leadership, educational, and then of course also personal. I found a definition recently about coaching psychology, and if you don't mind, I'm gonna just quote it from the British Psychological Society, and it says that coaching psychology is the scientific study and application of behavior, cognition, and emotion to deepen our understanding of individuals and groups' performance, achievement, and well-being. So quite a mouthful there, but essentially a working coaching psychologist would abide by ethical rules, but would have their practice underpinned by empirical science and adopt a scientist practitioner perspective. I don't know if that answers your question.
think it does. I think about workplace wellness, just to kind of ask a sort of related question. If I were a manager or a leader in an organization, I wanted to support someone in my team who we thought some kind of coaching or mentoring intervention might be necessary. How would I help choose, for example, between a coach and a mentor? What would be the right thing for me to do as that manager?
Oh, yeah, that's also a really good question. And being strictly speaking, a coach myself and not a mentor, I often do mentoring. So I will mentor a lot of younger women who want to follow in the same kind of footsteps. But there's ongoing debate in the coaching and mentoring world, and this has been going on for decades, as to, is there an absolute distinction between being a coach and being a mentor, or are the lines more blurred? So I suppose a very simple explanation then would be that coaching focuses on guiding individuals to discover their own solutions, whereas mentoring entails sharing and providing personal experiences to help that person to develop in a certain area. So the one is more focused on guiding you through my experience. The other one is partnering with you along a journey where we believe that your solution, the solution you come up with, is the best one for you. And that would be the coaching stance as opposed to the mentoring. A mentoring relationship actually is usually a lot longer term, whereas a coaching partnership generally is a bit shorter and has a specific goal in mind when the partnership starts.
So roughly, how long's a piece of string, but roughly how long does that sort of coaching type relationship tend to exist, where you've seen it work really well?
I think if a coachee has found the coach that they really work well with, you might see short periods of work that is done together. So a short period meaning perhaps 4 to 6 sessions. Mm-hmm. But then that person, once that's achieved, might go away, and later on, when there is another change or challenge where they feel they would need the support of their coach, they might come back to that coach again and have another 6 to 8 sessions, as an example. I've had that with a number of my clients. So we'll work with them perhaps when they're going through a certain period in their life, for instance, changing jobs. And then a year later, I might have had that same person coming to me to work on relationship coaching.
Yeah, I'm not, this isn't about me, it's about our viewers and listeners, but I've had coaching and found it to be hugely advantageous, particularly when I've been trying to deal with issues that I find particularly difficult or knotty, really helping me unpick those and manage them in a good way.
Yeah, I like the way you frame that, actually, because when I'm talking to my students, I always talk about how, as a coach, they are there as a professional partner that their coachee can sit and trust, but together unravel the ball of wool that is in their head. So it's kind of similar to your analogy. I like that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So again, going back to me as a manager or a leader, I see that coaching is not formally regulated. How would I go about finding a good one, either for myself or a colleague?
Yes, that's also a really, really great question. And given that I work with a global team connected to one of the main accrediting bodies, so the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, I'm very biased in terms of the importance of accreditation. So while coaching may be unregulated from a country's law perspective, there are essentially 3 main global accrediting bodies for coaching and mentoring. So the one would be the one I've just mentioned, which is the Global European Mentoring and Coaching Council, commonly known as the EMCC, then the ICF, and the other one, the AOC. There are a number of smaller ones as well, but those are the 3 larger ones. So the main aim for these bodies is to try and regulate the field by setting competency standards and then recognizing coaching and mentoring organizations and individual professionals who to achieve those standards. The criteria are really strict, and individuals are required to have robust qualifications and experience, and also engage continuously in professional development and supervision. So to answer your question more directly, when looking for a good coach, your first search should be to find one that is accredited by one of these bodies. So for instance, they will say, for instance, on their bio that they have an EMCC practitioner accreditation or ICF PCC accreditation. I warn people too, actually, to be careful of those people who say they are accredited, but you can't see any specific reference to the accrediting body. In my experience, anyone who is accredited and has gone through this process will be very proud of that accreditation and will definitely refer to the body that has accredited them, the level they're accredited at, and they'll very often display the signature or logo that they've been given permission to use.
That's really helpful, because for someone who's new to this, that could be quite confusing and a bit almost scary, because you want to do the right thing for someone, but you're worried about ending up with the wrong type of coach.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there, unfortunately, I look forward to the day when there is other regulation as well. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people who think that a 1-2 day coaching certificate enables them to be a successful coach. But in fact, we must always remember that we're dealing with real people with real lives, and it needs education, it needs experience to be able to manage those situations properly.
Thank you. I also noticed from when we've spoken, also reading your bio, that you're a resilience expert. I thought that's fascinating. I've got to ask you, how do you define resilience? It's not about just putting up with stuff, is it?
No, it isn't. And thank you. Did I have that in my bio, resilience expert? I'm not sure that I'm an expert, because you're learning all the time. But yes, you're right. Resilience is not just about putting up with things. I do a lot of resilience teaching, and I've developed a model around resilience building. And the thing that comes out every single time is that resilience is about being able to successfully get through not just the big life things, but those little day-to-day, very challenging events that can compound and really push your stress levels. And somebody who is genuinely and ongoingly resilient will respond appropriately and then go on to thrive and even flourish. In the early days of resilience hype, actually, resilience was called or was seen as bouncing back. I have always preferred to say bouncing through or bouncing forward, because I think resilience is about learning from the past and being able to practice resilience building on a day-to-day basis. I also actually talk about a resilience energy battery. So that battery is what keeps us going day to day, and it gets depleted on a daily basis like a cell phone battery would. And staying resilient requires us to continually do things that will top that resilience battery up.
So it's a real kind of, almost there's like a methodology to it as well. It's not just about shutting up and getting on and hoping it goes away.
Yeah, there are definitely things that you can do. And many people might already have these incorporated in their life. They just don't realize that these are the things that are keeping them bouncing forward. But yes, there are definite things that you can do, interventions, and a lot of it research-based as well. Well-being interventions that can help keep that battery topped up.
Okay, bouncing forward indeed. Now, I know that sometimes, sadly, people turn to more self-destructive ways of coping when things get too tough to handle. We often run to think about things like drink and drugs, but there are other things as well. And when that situation occurs, which it does because people are people, are there any signs that managers can look out for or notice in their team members if it's going a little bit off piece, when it's going a bit wrong? And what can we do about it?
Yeah, also a really good question. I think the key thing is to look for what is different. So if a person is the type of person that is really engaged in meetings, they've always, got something important to say, they might have a positive energy about them, or they might be one of those people that likes to be what do we call it, grounded pessimism. So they might like to always look at what's the worst that can go wrong. Maybe they're more serious, maybe they are quieter in meetings. But when those behaviors change for longer than we normally say, about 2 weeks, so on an ongoing basis for 2 weeks, and particularly if there is no apparent reason for the change in behavior. In other words, there isn't some life event or changes that have been happening at work that might account for them needing to self-soothe, and therefore their behavior changes. We need to watch for those differences. So that's the key thing. If somebody on the team is behaving differently to what they normally do for an extended period of time, then it really, really is time to, reach out and get that communication going.
So I read recently in one of the many surveys that happens in the whole workplace wellness space that sometimes managers are not very confident about what the right thing to do is. There's plenty of will, but a lack of confidence. So if, say, I did spot someone whose behavior changed quite markedly, say for a month, and I was quite worried about that, obviously you can't run the whole process, but how do I get into the right kind of conversation?
Yes, I actually teach a mental health for managers, or managers managing mental health in the workplace. But the key thing is to open the door for conversation. Now, generally, managers who know their teams will already have that communication line open. And of course, it all depends on whether the other person wants to share information or not. But generally, you might, as the manager, just start off by, saying, "Hey, Jim, how are you doing? I noticed that you were a little more subdued than usual. How are things going for you? Do you want to come have a chat? Do you want to go for a coffee?" So to really try and just start off lightly. And then if that person responds positively, then it's about going to a place that is quiet and private, and making the conversation safe for them, and just asking them, actually coaching questions. What's going on for you right now, Jim? What else is going on? How can I help you? How can we support you?
And if Jim, in your example, if Jim doesn't really want to have a chat, doesn't really want to open up, what do I do? Just leave it out there that I'm happy to have a chat anytime? Or is there a kind of right way to leave it when the individual doesn't want to engage?
Well, obviously you have to respect the other person's wishes, but I advise that you keep checking in, and you keep, from every couple of days, say, "Hey, Jim, just remember, my door's open. How are things for you today? Is there anything I can help you with?" Or so, just to keep that open. And in my experience, if there is a need there, then Jim will come along, and one of those times will say, "Actually, you know what, I do need to talk."
Okay. There's a quote that springs to mind. I'm going to ask you how pertinent you think it is. And the quote is, it's, "Lord, grant me the strength to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." What's your reflection on that? Is that pertinent?
Well, first of all, I know that is a common verse to say in recovery, actually, recovering from anything, recovering from workaholism, alcoholism, etc. But even in the coaching, from the coaching perspective, and certainly, again, I teach my clients and my students this, that there are times when we are not going to be able to control much more than just how we react to a situation. And then to ask ourselves, well, what can I control in this situation? Generally, when there are other people involved, the only thing you really have complete control of is yourself and your response to a situation. But very often you may be able to influence the situation. So it's about saying, all right, is there any way I can positively influence this situation? And what do I need to do? And then, of course, finally, to accept. So again, I add little phrases like give yourself permission to accept the situation just for now. And when that just for now allows us a get out clause almost, so that we don't have to continue accepting the situation forever. When things change, so then we can look at it again and see, well, maybe I could control or influence a little bit more.
I can think of examples in my own work experience where if I'd have used that just for now expression at the end, that would have helped me stay calm about something that I probably wasn't very calm about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're coming towards the end of the podcast, and just before we finish, I'd like to ask, I can imagine that listening to other people's challenges can be a lot to kind of take on board, keep in your head. How do you actually manage for yourself to keep that balance and keep your emotions healthy?
Yes, you're quite right. In the early days, it was very, very hard to leave other people's issues behind when I went home, for instance. But I suppose I've got a couple of things that I've learned to prioritize, and I think that's also key. But the first one is to manage the thoughts in my head, especially negative thoughts. So this is called negative rumination. And I know, dealing with clients, a lot of people struggle with leaving behind stuff when they've left work. And it just goes over and over and over in their head. So I use my 5 senses to refocus my brain's attention, because essentially that negative rumination is your brain going over and over and over, but it's doing something. So you need to refocus it to look at something else. And generally I will look outside the window and there's a lovely scene and I'll say, oh, what can I see? What can I hear, etc. So that's the one thing. And then the other thing I do is I spend time with horses, because I have a deep connection with them, and being in that space, because you have to be very mindful when you're around horses, and not everybody would like to be around horses because they're scared of them, but being around animals, I think, makes you really, really focus on that other soul that is in front of you, and then can take your mind off the things that are worrying you. So those are the 2 things I'd say I use most.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. And before we finish, are there any final thoughts for our listeners and viewers you'd like to share?
Yes, I'd say there are a couple of key things where our brain very quickly becomes threatened, and doing the opposite of what threats our brain perceives is a good thing to do. So in other words, we don't like being disconnected from people. So stay connected, but stay connected to positive people in your life. Consider what the people in your life give you in terms of energy, positive or negative. Do things that make you feel good, as long as they're healthy things. Yeah. Contact a professional to help you earlier rather than later. As a 20-year breast cancer survivor, early intervention of any kind of emotional, physical, or mental issue is really, really key. And then, of course, the old things: eat balanced meals, don't drink too much coffee or alcohol, although I probably drink far too much coffee, and get fresh air and exercise.
Simple stuff, but really good advice. Shelley, thank you very, very much for joining us today and for sharing your insight, and some quite personal insights as well. We really do value that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steven. It was lovely talking to you.
And you. Thank you for being part of the Unlocking Workplace Wellbeing podcast from Verve Healthcare today. If you want to improve wellbeing in your workplace through structured access to mental health support, physiotherapy, GPs, or how to manage personal finances in a better way, then we've got a solution for you. We have a proactive approach which gets right to the heart of the problem. So visit us at vervehealthcare.co.uk and please be sure to subscribe. Thank you.